Our first discussant is Yuri Schasvoort. He is also affiliated with GlocalNet. I think you're managing your microphone now, and please take the floor. Currently, Yuri works at Groningen University. He prepares a PhD thesis using agent-based simulation models to understand the interactions between finance and the economy. But now he's also taking a risk himself because he will be a discussant to his thesis advisor. So, good luck.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, Lex is my thesis advisor. So I will probably agree to everything he just said. No, thank you, Lex, for this interesting lecture. And this is also quite new for me because I've been working with Lex on complexity and uncertainty a few years ago, creating an online course. But in the meantime, I also have a thesis to finish, and Lex has sort of run ahead with this framework. So it was very interesting for me to hear about it, what you've been up to while I was stuck behind a computer screen. But your theories, or this complexity theory, is actually central to my work as an economist at the University of Groningen. And before I start, I want to ask you, who among you is also trained as either an economist or someone in business? Can you please raise your hands if that is the case? Okay, so that's quite a few people, I think a slight majority. The reason I ask is that, well, as Lex mentioned, this way of thinking is very different from what we as economists, how we are trained to think. So, especially before the financial crisis, we were trained to think using quantitative methods, using data from the past, and using models. And these models, they deliver beautiful results, and they look very fancy. So it's really natural that you start to believe in that certainty. Whereas Lex is often arguing that there is no such thing as certainty. There's also not really something like risk. You cannot really calculate the probability of something happening. So one of Lex's major points is there's actually uncertainty. You cannot know the probability of something occurring. And of course, there's a scale of gray here. You can be pretty certain about some stuff and very uncertain about others. And this, as a theory, I think is very deep. And the same thing goes for complexity. So I really want to encourage all of you to, if you look at these slides from Lex, if you look at Tai, if you look at Fauk, and you're thinking, okay, that's very logical. I get it. If you're still in your economist thinking mode, you don't get it. So please have a look at more materials online, because for me, it really clicked after more thinking about this and thinking about how it's actually different from how I used to think. So I will elaborate on this a little bit. So as an economist and as a macroeconomist, I started my studies in 2007. So a very interesting year for economists. Because before this, and I still read about this from all the famous professors, there was this period that they called the Great Moderation. And this links to Lex's lecture because it was a period of great stability. So inflation was wonderfully stable, economic growth was wonderfully stable, and economists were super, super confident. Their models got it right. They were just tweaking some parameters here and there, but basically they could predict the future. Now, I will argue that these models did exactly the opposite of what they were designed to do. So indeed, there was this great stability, but this links to the financial instability hypothesis of Hyman Minsky, a famous economist, which says it can be precisely the stability which you really don't want to have, because it creates the circumstances for instability. And in finance, if it's really easy on financial markets, then, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to the bank, I'm going to get a loan, and I'm going to invest in those financial markets. Because it's very safe. It's always stable. And then what I found very interesting happened is that this was the risk management models made the system fragile. So the stability created instability in the long run. And I think this is a key insight for which complexity theory and thinking about uncertainty changed my way of thinking as an economist, and also luckily for many other economists. So I don't want you to worry too much. And this is going to be my second point. So I am an economic modeler. And Lex is my thesis supervisor. And he has this very interesting way of supervising me, where it kind of boiled down to that he doesn't really believe in models. And I'm making models. So that was somewhat disconcerting for me, especially in the beginning. But it has to do with this concept of uncertainty. And it has to do with that these models were used in the wrong way, that they were used for prediction. I think this was also the case in many banks, where you just had these models that would predict a probability of a risk. And they were terribly wrong. And Lex convinced me that this way of modeling might not be the right way. So I'm trying a different strategy. So what I'm doing is I'm making simulation models. They're called agent-based models at the University of Groningen. And there you have, this is a complex system. So there you have all little agents, and all of them are different from each other. And how I try to explain it very often is look at it as a video game. So there's all sorts of agents trading with each other, for example. And how we use it is not to predict the future. So I have made a stock market model, for example. I'm not going to tell you what the stock market's going to do. That's way too complex of a system for my simple model, even though I can put fancy graphics on it, it looks very cool, to say anything about it. But what can it do for us? And there, I think, complexity is extremely difficult for us to understand. So, and what I mean by that is that if there is an action in the market, let's say more traders want to go into index funds. This is a question I'm thinking about with people at Cardano at the moment. So, okay, I can think ahead what this will do to the other traders who are not going into index funds, if I have an idea what kind of strategies they're using. But what if some traders going into index funds changes the market dynamics, which lets these other traders change their strategy? Now I have to think, okay, how do they change their strategy? And how will this impact the market again? And how will this again change their strategies? And how will that change the strategies of the index investors? And then you have all of these feedback loops, which I really cannot follow in my head. It's kind of starting to hurt talking about it to you. So this is what we use these new types of models for. So I now have this simulation model with all sorts of agents who update their strategies. And then I say, okay, here, computer, are 100,000 different scenarios, which are somewhat different. Play, go. And then I don't know beforehand what will happen. But the beautiful thing is, this is a simulated reality. It's like an experiment. So I can go back into the model and try to understand it after it has run its course. And now I still cannot go back to a bank and say, okay, well, this index trend is going to destroy you, or is going to bring you millions of dollars in cash. But I can say, okay, in my models, I actually found this result that after 10 feedback loops, the market changed, and now they're doing this. So what in Lex's way of thinking, what we've now done is we've taken an uncertainty, because we didn't know about it beforehand, and made it somewhat into a risk. Because now we know of the possibility of this happening. And this is why I'm still here with Lex today, and I'm confident that he will sign my PhD thesis at the end of it. So that's the modeling part that I want to contribute to this discussion. And the second part is that this has also changed my thinking if I'm looking to organizations in the news, for example. So let's say I'm watching a television and I'm looking at this very interesting show called Brexit. Then I talked to some people who work for the British government, and they said this strange thing happened. A few years ago, I had all of the status. I was respected because the British government had this image of being competent, just like our government, internationally at least, still has today. And now they look like fools. And this, I think, is for me not surprising, because I thought, okay, this organization, this huge organization, was very effective in one state of the system, but it was not resilient. So it wasn't able to adapt once there was this change in the system's behavior. And now the same people, the same smart people, are failing, whereas before this they commanded huge respect. So this illustrates for me, and I hope you can see this as well, that this complexity thinking, this uncertainty thinking, it changes a little bit your view of the world. And that can be extremely helpful. And that's why I think that this framework is very interesting for companies. And Lex has also started to teach people about this, because it can change people's thinking of how they see the world. And these organizations, and this comes back to Hayek, one of Lex's favorite economists, are so dispersed, and there's so many people, and the people at the top cannot possibly know everything. They cannot know all the information. But if you train all the people in this organization to just think differently, then an organization, I think, indeed can become more adaptive and more resilient. And the most interesting thing that we sadly couldn't talk too much about, I think, is anti-fragility. So that an organization is shocked or has uncertainties and then becomes better for it. I think that's for me, is the most interesting part. So I really hope that a couple of you will ask some questions about this. Now, there's one thing that I still want to ask, and that is to Lex. So the Fouke principles that you said or mentioned can be applied to people. But you are arguing here that they should be applied to organizations. But an organization is a super large group of dispersed people. So does it work just exactly the same way? Or does it work very differently? Yeah, you might respond at the end, or are you going to respond now?
I don't know, but I think about the...
Okay.
Later, or...
Yeah, let's all keep it as food for thought.
Right, okay. So that was my first question, and then I really would like to talk more, like I said, about anti-fragility. Because, and then I would really hope that you have some example. Like, because I've been thinking about it, which organization is anti-fragile? That is something I really cannot answer. Because it really helps if you have a concrete example of some organization doing the right thing. Right? So this is the second point that I really want to talk about. And with that, I would really like to leave it to the next speaker, or the next commentator, Anita.
Thank you very much, Yuri. I think these are two very interesting cliffhangers you leave us with. But for now, we'll listen to Dr. Anita Kopaniji-Peuker, if I pronounce about correctly. Sorry for that. You're postdoctoral researcher at University of Amsterdam using laboratory experiments to investigate human behavior in all sorts of financial settings. So I think you know a thing or two of behavioral economics, and we're very curious to listen to your criticism, comments, suggestions, whatever.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, that's good. So first of all, thank you for the organizers. Thank you, Fieke, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. And also thank you, Lex, about this very interesting presentation, and this is a very important topic, so I agree with that. Our world is very complex and uncertainty is everywhere. So don't worry, I didn't put a lot of things on the slides. I just found a very nice quotation that I would like to show you, so that's why I prepared slides as well. So yes, as Fike said, I'm a behavioral economist. I do laboratory experiments to understand more how people behave and to be able to understand a little bit more expectation formation or other financial decision making. So basically, I think our experiments can be also very good feedback to your model, Yuri, because when you think about agent-based modeling and bounded rationality, you can think about many different rules and very different heuristics or strategies that agents can use. And from the experiments, we can also get some insights which rules are used a little bit more often and which rules or strategies might be used less often. So these can be fed back to the agent-based models as well and used for the simulations. So as Lex said, we can never predict everything in our life. And even if we would be able to predict everything, and even if we would be able to assess all the possibilities, actually people are not willing to do that. People are not willing to evaluate all possible actions and strategies, and they don't necessarily optimize when they make their decisions. What they do, they might just go for satisficing, so that they just choose an option which is the best possible or it's good enough in the given situation. And this was already found several decades ago, and this led to the emergence of bounded rationality, behavioral economics with Thaler, Kahneman, and Tversky, and also Taleb that you mentioned. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to do a very short recap of the lecture, and then I would like to raise 3 concepts that I found very interesting with respect to the lecture, and I think that they can pose a little bit of difficulty on how to apply FAUC. So I'm going to talk about rational inattention, survivorship bias, and also hindsight bias. But before I do that, I will just very quickly go back to the black swans, but also Lex mentioned, and Taleb's name was already mentioned today. So black swans are these events which fall in the 4th quadrant, where basically you cannot know the probability with which the event will happen, and you also don't know the magnitude, the effect of the event. So you don't know how bad it will be or how good it will be. And what Taleb proposes is a strategy of a so-called barbell strategy, meaning that you incur small losses, constant small losses, for a potential huge gain. So this works as of an insurance, for example. But on the other hand, Kahneman and Tversky with the prospect theory showed that people are loss averse. So people actually might not like having this barbell strategy because incurring small losses constantly is just bad for them. Of course, people are also risk averse and they do take on insurances. So already these 2 strategies or these 2 aspects are contradictory to each other. So the question arises, what strategy should I adopt? Should I adopt a barbell strategy? Should I just also disregard small probabilities at all and don't care about black swans? I don't know the answer, but the framework FAUC offers some thoughts for this and some insights. So what Lex talked about today was first he introduced TIE, the theory of human action and interaction. And this is based on the neo-Austrian economics uncertainty complexity theory with relation to bounded rationality, behavioral economics, and cognitive psychology, and also many others. And the 7 key insights that he derived from that. And these insights are about our knowledge, about our predictive abilities, and about our actions. And these 7 insights form a basis for the framework for acting under uncertainty and complexity. So FAUC sheds light on how to act given the 7 insights derived under TIE. And it defines 7 core qualities: to be entrepreneurial, to have knowledge, to be alert, to be resilient, adaptive, anti-fragile, and creative. I put bold alertness, resiliency, and adaptivity because they form the basis of risk management 2.0. And this risk management 2.0 has 4 building blocks: to be at security, be alert, be robust, and to learn. And it relies on a just culture with people having personal responsibilities and leaders leading by example. To be honest, I really like this just culture because I think that good leaders are very important, and good leaders are part of the team. So they have to be part of the team, and they shouldn't be someone who is just above the team and just tells what to do, but really he participates in the production, for example. And this creates a safe environment. And it's very important because on the one hand, workers are motivated to work. And it's not only that they are extrinsically motivated, but they are also intrinsically motivated to work. And they are also motivated to participate in problem solving, right? So whenever a black swan hits, workers in such an environment are more likely to help to solve the problem. I found the 4 building blocks very nice, and it seems to be efficient. So I think that the balance between the 4 blocks is very important, because you can focus on learning, you can also focus on monitoring or building security. But it's an interesting question: how often is it efficient to redefine, for example, key disruption concepts? How continuous should be this continuous feedback loop? And here comes the first concept that came to my mind, and that's rational inattention. So already there is enormous literature on this concept, and this is that basically it might be optimal not to gather costly information, so not to invest effort and money and time to get a lot of information and process them in order to make an optimal decision. But actually it might be optimal to just make a decision under incomplete information. So there is already literature in macro and finance about rational inattention. I just put an example here about portfolio choices, which shows that investors might under or over invest due to rational inattention and due to myopic behavior. Why do we have myopic behavior here? Because the future is not necessarily predictable, right? So because they cannot predict the future, it might be that they just don't look that forward. Now about how to learn about our environment. We know that it's very difficult to estimate probabilities, and if it's possible at all. But of course, we can try to get an insight about the different situations, different incidents. And we can learn from our own experiences and also from the experiences of others. Now, as Lex already said, one experience is kind of easy to document, so that if we have something happening in the organization, we can just document it, and for the future, it's there. But what about the others? Here comes an important difficulty, and that's a selection bias, the so-called survivorship bias. So it might be that the information that's available from other organizations is a little bit biased. It's selective. Why is this the case? Because in the financial sector, it might be that firms which fail, they are usually excluded from financial reporting once they cease to exist. So it's very well possible that due to this selection bias, the information that's available is biased, and we cannot see all the information that would be relevant for our case. Also, this is the case with the near misses, because the near misses from our organizations can be taken into account. But I might not have information about the near misses from other organizations. And the last concept I would like to talk about is the hindsight bias. And I have a little bit more slides on that, because I think it's also more interesting. And it can happen both in professional settings, but also in personal settings. I think that this is a bias that many of us might have inside. So this bias happens when there are incidents, And people say afterwards that I knew it. I knew it will happen. There were signs. I just didn't take them into account correctly. I could have predicted the incidents to happen. So this is the hindsight bias that even even the event could not be predicted. People think afterwards that it could have been predicted. And this is not only in finance, but it's also in other domains, like in healthcare. So for example, it might be that there is a early stage cancer that is not detected on the X-ray. But as the cancer develops further and further, and the doctor goes back to the very first X-ray, they might see the sign that, oh, I should have catched that there. And this is the part where I found a very nice quote from Richard Thaler from his book, Misbehaving. And I think it's very nice, so I would like to show it to you. I found the concept of hindsight bias fascinating and incredibly important to management. One of the toughest problems a CEO faces is convincing managers that they should take on risky projects if the expected gains are high enough. Their managers worry, for good reason, that if the project works out badly, the manager who championed the project will be blamed whether or not the decision was a good one at the time. Hindsight bias greatly exacerbates this problem because the CEO will wrongly think that whatever was the cause of the failure, it should have been anticipated in advance. And with the benefit of hindsight, he always knew this project was a poor risk. What makes the bias particularly pernicious is that we all recognize this bias in others, but not in ourselves. So I think this is a very nice quote on hindsight bias. And also this last sentence is very important. And it's not only about the hindsight bias, but it can also be interpreted in other settings. For example, if I did some effort for some project, and the project turns out badly, it's much more likely that I blame bad luck than my effort, compared to the fact when another worker makes some effort, and I see that the project turned out badly, I might think that this was just the effort of the worker, and it's not on bad luck. So it's a very important feature of biases of decision making. So there was already a huge literature on hindsight bias, mainly in psychology, and also some ways to overcome it. One way to overcome it is to think about alternatives. If you start to think about alternative outcomes, then you realize that this is not the only way the event can end up. So then you might realize that actually, really the event could not have been predicted. And in this case, accessibility of events and alternatives play a role. So how easy it is to recognize and to find other alternative outcomes. And this can be bias, the hindsight bias. So these are the three main points and concepts that came to my mind while I was reading the slides and listening to your talk. So I also prepared some questions, but the first one is whether you could give us some concrete examples or measurements on how risk management 2.0 differs from risk management 1.0. Because I think that it's very interesting to see how to implement it in the practice. And also whether there is a possibility on how to overcome or incorporate the biases that people just have in their head by default. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anita. I now invite the three speakers to take positions at the table, and we will practice our resiliency or adaptability of Lex by changing the order of the program. Lex, I would like to give you the opportunity to answer these burning questions, like what is your unit of analysis? Can you give an example of anti-fragility? And the two questions by Anita, the differences between risk management 1.0 and 2.0, and what's your guidance with respect to the three biases she referred to?
So first of all, thank you, Yuri and Anita, for your comments and for taking the trouble to go through an earlier version of the slides and for making a number of very interesting and fascinating questions. Let me try to be relatively brief, and probably I will not succeed. So then stop me, Fieke, if I go on too long. So first on Yuri's two basic points. One on anti-fragility, which is basically not an element of the risk management framework, but still it's fascinating. And you asked me to give examples, and let me give you, or let me first refer you to anti-fragility in nature. There is in nature there is the characteristic that biological structures, and I've forgotten the name, the biological structures get stronger under pressure. So anti-fragility is getting stronger after under pressure, under disadvantages. So it's a feature of nature. So you can find many examples. If you go to the real world, training in sports. What do you do by training is that you put yourself under pressure. And by putting yourself under pressure, you strengthen your muscles, for instance. So that's a huge number of examples in the real world. In companies, I think first of all, it starts with a mental thinking. So that if you get a setback, that you do not automatically become defensive, but start to think about how to come better out of it, how to turn it into your advantage. I have a small example from one of the provinces in the Netherlands, where there was pressure on farmers in the context of sustainability policies that threatened their activities, and then the union of those farmers used that pressure to increase the number of farmers that were a member of their union, and using that to get the policies off the table. So they ended up without the policies that were threatening and were a larger organization. So that's an example. I referred earlier to my work at LCH. A real life example there is Brexit. Brexit is in a way a threat to LCH London. It could mean that our business will move to continental Europe. We have a strategy in which we, in the end, try to maintain the business in London while getting, in the end, a stronger supervisory regime. So these are a couple of examples. You asked about the difference between applying the framework to persons or to groups. Yes, there is a difference. We use different questions in trying to assess how fit for complexity an organization is, and how fit for uncertainty an organization is, from the type of questions that we use for assessing that for a person. So it's the same concept, but it has different meaning in a way. But the nice thing is that it's consistent with one another. So if you have persons working in the organization and you learn them to think in terms of the, let's say, of the FAUC personal framework, it will help them to operate the FAUC company framework. So let me move on to Anita. What I on purpose didn't mention in my presentation behavioral economics and cognitive psychology. And so it was for me, it was a surprise. I don't know whether it's positive or negative to find in the summary that I had referred to cognitive psychology. I hadn't done that on purpose because I wanted to say something in response to what I expected you to say. And there's much more to say about the relation between, let's say, the Thai approach and the underlying approaches that let's say that are used, that are the roots of Thai, and cognitive psychology and behavioral economics and behavioral finance in particular. And this framework, I think in the end it is, you can use a lot of the insights from cognitive psychology, I think, in this framework. But the framework itself is emphasizing something different from what cognitive psychology emphasizes. Cognitive psychology emphasizes the limits in our cognitive capacities, as it were. This framework emphasizes that even if we would have perfect cognitive capacities, if all the biases that you mentioned wouldn't be there, we still wouldn't know the future. That's part of the human condition that you cannot get around. And the framework is primarily designed to take that into account. And now in designing the framework, my initial impression is that you can benefit a lot from views from cognitive psychology. But there can be another view. If you look at Taleb, he's very critical about cognitive psychology, for reasons where I have some sympathy for. So I'm not. For me, it's not a finished discussion. You referred at a point to insurance and Taleb, and that's where I deviate from Taleb. Uncertainty, by definition, cannot be insured. So he still thinks in a framework where you have probability distributions. Only they are different from the normal distribution. You have these black swans. This framework goes beyond black swans. We don't know the distributions, and we have to deal with that.
I think this is also an answer to the other questions, more or less.
Yeah,
So
if you
that
want to
we-
stop me here, I can stop. You save me for the moment.
Okay, thank you very
Perhaps I
much.
find
It
a way
was
to
clear and
come back
concise.
to it.
The audience has been perfectly patient waiting for 1.5 hours now, and I guess there are burning questions. First of all, gentlemen here, are your questions answered by now? Could you then please stand up so that we can all hear you? And
Yes.
yes?
I have two questions for Lex. The first one is what I alluded to earlier is how can risk management 2.0 be implemented in the financial sector, considering that a lot of financial fund managers, for example, they have certain pension funds have risk targets, risk budgets, which often are the basis of everything they do.
Can everyone hear this? Otherwise, I'll repeat it. Yeah, otherwise, please wave if you can't hear it. Okay. Yes? And your second question, please?
The question is, to what extent has this risk management 2.0 been implemented? You alluded to it very briefly, but to what extent has it been implemented already, and where are improvements to be made?
To what extent has Risk Management 2.0 be implemented?
Yeah, so first on risk budgets and risk targets. That gives me the opportunity to answer, I think, one of the questions from Anita. That's something that you do not use in risk management 2.0, so you don't set a risk appetite and then allocate a budget to that. So you basically define your operations. You define the potential disruptions to that operation. And you do that as the board. And you basically state as a board, I don't tolerate any disruption to my operations, although I'm aware that they will happen every now and then, because there's always potential surprise. Then you, where you have an appetite, and what you have to define is how much effort, how much money. It's also alluding to a question for you on efficiency. How much money do you spend on, for instance, monitoring? How often do you monitor? What's the frequency of your monitoring? How do you define your disruption materiality metrics? How sensitive do you make the trigger, and so on and so forth? In the starting situation, that because this evolves over time, this is not something that you do one moment and then you never changes. This is a process, a learning process. So you start in the organization. What the organization has a preference, the board has a preference for. We feel comfortable if we do a risk control self-assessment once a year. We feel comfortable if we define the thresholds in a certain way, and then time lapses, and then it becomes endogenous for a part, and that's one of the attractive things about it, because then if your threshold, for instance, is triggered, and you find a weakness, then you will spend money on that weakness. So it's endogenous. So you do not calculate once and for all what you spend with. It's a learning process. I referred to my experience at LCH. I will not claim that they have completely implemented this framework as I discussed it here, but they have implemented important elements of it, and I can tell you that led to very intense discussions with our supervisor, the Bank of England in particular, who wanted us to define a tolerance, for instance, for how many incidents do you as a board tolerate every quarter. And we said, we do not tolerate an incident at all. But they said, yeah, they will happen. I said, yeah, they will happen. But what we will try to do is to learn from the incidents and get better and learn all the time. So
but in risk management 1.0, people also learn from incidents. So what's the essential difference then?
I think there is. So one essential difference is that if you, let's elaborate a little bit this example. If you, for instance, say, I tolerate 5 high incidents a quarter. Mm-hmm. That means if there are 4 in the quarter, not much happens because it is tolerated. And in this approach, every high incident is one too many and triggers adjustment and triggers measures, triggers a report, triggers learning, and so on and so forth. Which gives me also the opportunity to answer one other point. Learning from others, you said, is difficult. It depends. You can organize a sector in a way where you can learn from others. For instance, in aviation, you have open databases after every near miss that every pilot can access the database on near misses, and so you can learn from others. And so what I mentioned as a library of wisdom is an internal learning mechanism, but you can easily make that external. Did I answer the 2 questions, or at least go some way to answer the 2 questions? I think.
Otherwise, we'll come back on it. There's a question there, please.
I hope you can hear me. So there was something you said said, Lex, and maybe also Yuri can answer this question. What surprised me is that you said we don't include the positive surprises. Somewhere maybe I misunderstood, but you said we focus on the negative. Is that correct? And we don't include the positive. So I was curious, why not also include the positive? And maybe I was curious also for Yuri if in his relations you actually see the situation of an ecosystem going into lose-lose or win-win. So the positive also being a factor.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so then probably I did not express myself sufficiently clear. So in the overall framework, there's as much attention for trying to detect positive surprises, for trying to find opportunities and dealing with that, as there is for detecting negative surprises. But that part of the framework, which is related to positive surprises and then also to adaptability for a part, more focuses, for instance, on how to foster innovation and so on and so forth. So that isn't part from extended risk management. So that's why I didn't discuss that in particular. So there's much more to say about that, but that's outside risk management, and you extend it even more than I did. Gives me, before I give the floor to Yuri, also the opportunity to answer another element that Yuri mentioned. Was not a question, but Yuri mentioned agent-based modeling. And how to use or not to use agent-based modeling in risk management 2.0. What I like as an element is what I would call extending agent-based modeling to making it a game, and you can relatively easily do that. So, for instance, so-called war games, then on the basis of agent-based models are. Can be very useful in training yourself in adaptive capacity, in alertness. So I see agent-based models, which, provided that they are the real persons can interact in the models, so are one of the agents in the models. I find that very useful tool, but then basically we are then merging gaming and agent-based modeling, which I think should be done. And then you have something what again aviation, flight simulation is something similar, although it's not agents, of course.
On to the next agent.
Yeah, going into that first, I think that's an excellent idea. It's actually on my agenda to do. It's very natural to incorporate people. I mean, I described it as sort of a game with bots, interacting with each other. So to add people to that would well, it's already happening in video games as we speak. But to do it in a more serious way, I think is also very interesting, and that ties into with how you opened with suggesting perhaps a research collaboration where we use your experiments and my simulations. So yeah, this will happen. I think after this we'll have a talk and make it happen. And to respond to your question about a win-win in models. So okay, I have an example. This is not from my model, but something that I found fascinating when getting into this and coming from an economics traditional modeling background, where there's this philosophy that says, okay, if everybody acts in their own self-interest, then you get this optimal outcome, and it's also only rational for people to act in this way, very selfishly. And then there's this one model about cows, where there's grass, and then they model cows, and they experiment with two strategies. So they say, okay, there's this selfish strategy where you eat all the grass, or there's this cooperative strategy where they eat a little bit less grass and they take into account other cows. And what they find is that under different circumstances, there emerges this steady state where both cases can happen. So in some, and it depends a little bit on the parameters, and that's the interesting part. In some cases, the cows really evolve towards being nice to each other, and that's a conclusion to the model, and that really also gives me hope as an economist that we can give this more positive message than just be selfish all the time, because that's good for all of us. But also sometimes the selfish equilibrium emerges where a lot of cows die from starvation, but the strong cows are doing very well.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now entering the dangerous situation in which 3 economists seem to agree. So that can't be true. I saw a couple of people frowning, so please raise your doubts. Yes, 2 gentlemen, first you. And for you, please be brief, so that we can have more questions.
Yeah, I'd like to,
Could you stand up, please? That's easier to listen to you.
yeah, sure. I have a question about symptoms and causes. It seems that you are all focused on the symptoms of problems, and but aren't the causes of all these risks, uncertainty, too much leverage in the financial system, and the moral hazard created by the lender of last resort, and how that culture trickles down through the whole economy? And isn't it wiser for people doing risk management to focus on those causes?
Yes, I emphasized in the talk, without elaborating in any detail, the importance of personal responsibility, of a corresponding ethical system. So if you have asymmetry in the system, in terms of that some people can take risk, but they only partly have to bear themselves, you are in for trouble. And that's basically what you say in other words. So in the design of your system, you have to ensure that you get rid of the asymmetries as much as possible. So answer is yes, I agree. But on the other hand, and it's a very important factor, that's why I stress the cultural factor and the ethical part in it. But it's not everything has to do with moral hazard. For instance, cybersecurity. That's not something that where leverage is at the root and moral hazard is at the root. So yes, important, but not the only thing. If you take care of that, not that you suggested that, but we could interpret you in that way. It's not just getting moral hazard under control, in my view.
Thank you. Anita, would you like to add? No? Okay. Was there a rebuttal or otherwise? I saw some. Okay. Then the next question, please, Dan.
Hearing the words uncertainty and adaptability, the strong feeling that a risk manager 2.0 is always behind the curve. What to do getting up front of the curve?
Part of the framework, I defined resilience in two components. Prevent to the extent possible disruptions, and then responding to that. Responding to it, you could say, then you are behind the curve. But there I would say the reality is that there will always be things that you couldn't anticipate. How much time you spend on doing it. So we cannot do without that element, but we can also not do without the first element. So trying to trying to prevent, and that is trying to anticipate what might happen, using your imagination. What kind of disruptions could happen? How can I respond to them by building them into my system, by thinking about what will I do if something like this happens. So scenario analysis in all kinds of different shapes and forms, not just, let's say, a scenario for the total firm, but also to the very micro level of a person that should spend time on thinking about what will I do in the next operation. There we have a very good example, again, from a Dutch soccer coach, Louis van Gaal, who always told his players before the game that they should imagine what their opponents would do. So that's what he called imagineren, and then think how you respond to that. Well, that is anticipation. That's a very good security and resiliency building, and it's preventative. So so I would deny that the framework is just being behind the curve. It's trying to be as much as possible, to prepare as well as you can, but being aware that you will never be certain that you are 100% prepared. So there will be situations where you will have an incident, a disruption, and then you should be able to respond to that. And that's the second element.
Thank you very much. Time for a final question. Lady there.
Yes, so with hindsight, if you were a turkey, what could you have done? I mean, the question actually is, well, you know the signals, but like, could risk management 2.0 have prevented it?
First Lex, then Anita.
Yeah. I cannot, of course, for the turkey it's difficult. I find it hard to imagine to be a turkey and to see what do. But let's use the other point about the financial crisis, or another, let's say, interesting recent disaster, ING, having to pay a fine of 775 million. Basically, that's a result of not, if I translate it in this framework, not being very compliancy risk resilient. I think in this case, I cannot prove it. There are some simple things where I can prove. I will mention that in a minute. Here I cannot prove it because I haven't investigated the case in great detail. But my impression is that if I were to apply this framework to INGs, there's something to be desired. I wondered whether the top of ING was aware of how they managed this risk, whether they had really, let's say, decided on how to monitor it, when it would be escalated to them. They could have discovered earlier on that they were missing quite something. They could have assessed far more clearly whether they would find that acceptable. The only thing is, would they have found it worthwhile? Would they have found themselves uncomfortable? And that's a matter of, in the end, of preference. Let me give you a smaller, but general example. A very small one. Suppose you have to send reports. Again, we are talking about compliance. You have to send, as a financial institution, you have to send reports to a regulator, and at a certain point, something goes wrong. That's, if you don't action on it, it can happen again, and most of the time it will happen again. If you take it seriously, and for instance, if this was a process that was a manual process and you then automate it, then you can almost prove that the mistake that you earlier made as a result of a human error will not happen again. So you have prevented that. So more generally, you could measure your increases in resiliency if you take measures where you can demonstrate that what caused an incident in the past is no longer causing an incident after you have taken the corrective measures. If you could totally prevent any financial crisis, I don't think so. But there are many things which you could have picked up earlier if you would pay would have a sufficiently high preference for being resilient. And if you would see resiliency not as something that competes with efficiency and growth and so on, but as a condition for being able to grow safely.
Thank you. Anita?
Does my microphone still working? Okay. I think it's also working.
Please take the handheld.
Okay, it's fine. So as for, I cannot see who was the questioner, but as far as I consider the Turkey, I think there were no signs for the Turkey, so it's not really possible to prevent it. And for the financial crisis in 2007, I'm also not completely sure whether it could have been prevented, because yes, as in hindsight, we see some symptoms that could have been picked up, but these are by hindsight. So behavioral finance has made a lot of research on that and found that, for example, investors were overconfident in that period, and they were also herding on trend following behavior and over-optimistic, which might also exacerbate the crisis. But even if we cannot, I don't think that we could have been able to predict the financial crisis, but now we can learn from it, and maybe we can capture these symptoms earlier and then act upon them. So there always has to be a first case in this sense to be able to learn from it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you all for contributing to this highly relevant discussion. I am sure that Michael Dam would have contributed by a couple of very sharp remarks as well. But even without him, we leave this room confused at a higher level maybe, but also a couple of very good ideas to become better risk managers in the real world. Talking about risk management, of course, Mr. Robert Dekker, Ms. Michelle Habetz and me are very happy to tell you more about our program. And then also on behalf of Cardano and CFA Society VBI Netherlands, I would like to thank the speakers by handing over a small symbolic gift. Because when we fully realize the enormous impact of complexity and uncertainty, we may feel like left in the dark. So what we then need is a little bit of light to see things in the proper perspective. And this doesn't only hold in theory, but also in practice. So I hope that this little lightning tool may be of help to you. I will hand it over to you, while at the same time inviting you for drinks and bites, and thanking you for your attention, wishing you safe journey home. Thank you.